Breaking news at the Walt Disney Company. It appears that a legendary Imagineer is coming back to teach people how it's done. Let's talk about that on That Park Place. Hello, I am Jonas J. Campbell, an investigative reporter for That Park Place, and it looks like I have a legendary theme park reporter here with me, Mr. Vash Sky. Please impart to us all of your theme park knowledge. How you doing today?
Doing pretty good. I don't know if I'm a legend or anything, but I do know one
Legend
legend.
in the making.
Well, I, if I'm not mistaken, it's Rohde. Am I right?
Rohde. Yeah,
Rohde?
he's getting his Disney Legend Award. We just want to say this to you all. The Walt Disney Imagineering Instagram has confirmed Joe Rohde's return to Walt Disney Imagineering. The post reads, beginning this week, Imagineers will have an opportunity to participate in a series of masterclass work sessions led by Joe Rohde. Following in the footsteps of many former Imagineers, Joe continues to mentor and share his years of storytelling knowledge with current Imagineers, contributing to the future of creativity at Walt Disney Imagineering. There he is, the man with the stretched ear himself, Joe Rohde. Possibly, I'm going to say he's the father of modern Imagineering. And the influence of Joe Rohde cannot be overstated here. He's probably the reason that even Universal trying to match him is causing them to do so well over there. Vash, is this a big deal? I need you to take it away from me at this point. Is this a big deal?
I think this is a big deal, yeah, because I think one of the big criticisms levied at Imagineering in the most recent past is, well, because you don't have necessarily those old Star Wars to necessarily pass down those lessons that have been so lovingly, let's say, learned over the decades, right? These past mistakes necessarily made by previous Imagineers, and they pass down that knowledge and say, hey, don't do this, or hey, do it this way. You know, a lot of that institutional knowledge was lost recently, unfortunately, with some not so great events like 2020, for example, or trying to move them to
debacle?
Florida.
Yeah.
Yes, Lake Nona.
That like no yes this situation, of course, it gets blamed on Bob Chapek. It probably was a Bob Chapek call, but Bob Iger was the chief the executive chairman for a long tenure of Bob Chapek's time as the CEO of the Walt Disney Company. I'm going to put this one on Bob Chapek. The move to Lake Nona was an intention to change the culture of Imagineering and also bring everything into an economic environment that maybe they were fearful that there would be a continuing situation over there with the global medical issue. I'm going to be very vague here, but that Lake Nona project ended up being wildly unpopular, as did many decisions that were made by Bob Chapek while he was at the company.
And unfortunately, because of that decision, you know, I've heard as many as 90% of Imagineers left the building, which is a stunning reality, because there were some longtime guys that were there, not just Joe Rohde, but Kevin Rafferty and others that just left the building. And you just go, oh my gosh, you know, who is going to necessarily pass down these lessons that like I was talking about before? So to get this, you know, this update here from, of all places, Joe Rohde's Instagram. Here, I'll go ahead and share you what Ashley Carter shared as well. It's taken straight from Joe Rohde's account here. He posted a video of himself outside of the Walt Disney Imagineering offices with the caption, doing a bit of work at the old farm. To you know, even if it's in just a consultant role, this is massive. This is huge. I think a lot of people have been wanting to see some of these old timers return, at least in some capacity, and especially as work is ramping up on maybe how well this turbocharging of the parks will actually be. Or, hey, we've heard that Animal Kingdom is coming to Disneyland Resort. You know, is he necessarily in the building for those reasons? You know, I think a lot could necessarily come out of this that could be beneficial for the Walt Disney Company.
I think this is great, and this is something that I think is good Walt Disney Company news. This is a sign to me that Walt Disney Imagineering themselves might be turning a corner here. But now this isn't the entire organization, but the idea that they are bringing in someone who can train them, and I mean, Joe Rohde is fantastic. And again, this is something I'm going to emphasize. I'm going to assume that Joe Rohde's politics are not the same as my politics. So this is not a political thing here. This is just good news for the company. You have someone who is an excellent creative spirit. And okay, so we'll go to this example. I think the name of the podcast is Zeitgeist.
Hmm.
It is an Imagineering centered podcast, if I'm remembering the name here. But Joe Rohde going off about how you pitch something as a creative. This was applicable to me in my line of work, and before I worked on That Park Place, this channel here. He did this excellent presentation on what they did with Olani, and he talked about, okay, the first thing that you're doing when you go in the room is not to impress them with an insane idea. You don't impress them with blue sky. He didn't use the phrase blue sky here. You first come in with the numbers. You say, we need this many units. It's going to service in this market. This is the demographic that it's going to be aimed to. These are the business reasons for what we're going to build. It's going to be all of these things that people expect at that price point. And then he talks about those signature elements they're going to put on top of it in order to make it a great experience and make it distinctly Disney and make it a great creative endeavor. You start with the business reasons, and then you talk about the insanity.
Well, of course, and I think that right there is a valuable lesson, right? And how many projects have we necessarily seen taken off the table recently? Hey, maybe if you had some of those lessons as passed down by Joe Rohde, maybe those things aren't necessarily taken off the table. Maybe if you put the business aspect forward, some of these things actually come to fruition. It's a principle that may have necessarily been lost as Imagineering has attempted to fill its ranks with people coming straight out of design school. It's like these young kids here, they don't necessarily know how to navigate that corporate ladder or those more business focused executives when pitching a product. It's stuff like that I think is really foundational to this whole thing. So the fact that we have a guy like that back in there, let's also say that they're going to be honoring this guy with a Disney legend here at the upcoming D23 Ultimate Fan event. The other person that's going to be honored there as well is James Cameron, and we know something is coming to Disneyland Resort dealing with Avatar. Could all these things be interacting with each other? Maybe.
Maybe they're coming out of the same meeting in order to go do that Disney Legends Award over there at the Honda Center. They just need to make sure the bags aren't too big if they're going into the Honda Center, of course.
That's a good point right there. But this is a guy who came out of the second generation of Imagineers, worked alongside guys like Tony Baxter, Bruce Gordon, and all those different fine folks that we talk about so frequently on this channel right here. Worked on Epcot projects, worked on, I believe, if I'm not mistaken, Captain EO, worked on all kinds of attractions all across the board. Animal Kingdom, obviously, being the most famous project that he's ever worked on for sure. But it spans the gambit here. I believe he was working on Lookout K at Lighthouse Point. I think was his last confirmed project right there. Was working on stuff for Tomorrowland at Disneyland that we see in the Imagineering Story documentary series on Disney Plus. This guy's invaluable. This guy is invaluable. I've always said before, the way you necessarily signal to the industry that you're really serious about getting back into the creative space with Imagineering is if you bring a guy like this back in. That signals to everybody else, oh, hey, they're serious. Maybe I'll necessarily consider work here as opposed to I'm going to go ahead and stay away from Imagineering like the plague.
Right, or to go to some consulting firm and say, no, you can hire me for a specific project, but I'm not going to be a WDI person. I'm going to be Ginsler or whatever company it is that happens to hire these Imagineers to come back at a contract rate, which I think this is probably that's not as advantageous to the company. I'm just going to assume there. Forgive me if you are one of the few people who actually knows the business economics of contracting these people versus that. So the thing that I also want to point out here is the institutional knowledge that has been lost at the Walt Disney Company. And obviously, Joe Rohde does not need to be checking every single spec on every single thing, but institutional knowledge is, or a drain of institutional knowledge is what was blamed for the debacle of World Celebration and the lights not functioning very shortly after that area was opened. After 6 years of construction, they finally open it. The lights are working, and then they're not. Why? Because the pressure washing that they have done at Walt Disney Parks for 60 years was not. They didn't properly design these to resist the pressure washing that these parks get on a frequent basis, and so they were shorting out these state of the art lighting systems. And so I don't know if they've fixed this permanently. We're not seeing lights out posts all over the place, or maybe people have moved on. I think this is the kind of thing that if you have someone who is like Joe Rohde, who can train that next generation, even though there's going to be growing pains, this is good for the company. This is a sign to me that they are moving in the right direction for Imagineering. Does this fix everything now? No, but it can fix things in the future. So balls and strikes, this is a good thing for the Walt Disney Company. Vash, do you have any comments here before we wrap up?
No, I was just going to echo your same points right there. We've seen a lot of projects coming out of WDI that aren't necessarily that inspiring, that engaging. We're seeing a lot of mistakes being made, like you said. The World Celebrations, that's the epitome right there. But it's just like the Moana Journey of Water, for example, or Toontown. We talked about that revolving door of construction walls that have occurred in that area for over a year now since that reimagined land opened. You know, a lot of these things could be avoided. A lot of these mistakes that they have to necessarily go in and fix could be avoided if you have somebody who understands. It's like, okay, even if we're going to budget cut a project, here's where we can spend the money wisely in order to build on these things and not necessarily have to replace them afterwards. Institutional knowledge is key, especially when it comes to Imagineering, because that's what Imagineering is. Otherwise, it's just a sign in a building.
Right.
It's that connection to the past that makes Imagineering what it is at 1401 Flower Street.
Right. It's an amazing tradition, and just like the company itself, if it is just a collection of people who happen to work here, if it is just a stack of intellectual properties that happen to be held by the same company, that's not magic. That's law. That's corporation. But with Walt Disney Imagineering, if you have people who can keep that tradition alive, keep that spirit of creativity and detail and wowing guests alive, that is so critical here. I think this is great, but of course I want to throw it to our audience. I want to ask you guys, what do you think? Is this something that is going to turn around the company eventually, or is this something that is not going to matter with the current state of Walt Disney Imagineering or the parks or anything like that? We would love to know your thoughts in the comment section down below. Of course, if you would consider liking this video, if we've helped you to understand this situation better, or if you just want to do that because it boosts us in the algorithm, we would appreciate it. Of course, the thing we would appreciate the most is if you would consider subscribing to That Park Place for all the news that should be fun.
Thanks for watching That Park Place News. For more information, consider checking out www.thatparkplace.com. And don't forget to subscribe, share, like, and send this out on your favorite social media accounts.